In the depths of China's imperial prisons, where shadows outlasted memory, one execution method stood out for its precision, cruelty, and silence: the red-hot iron collar. It wasn't just a punishment, it was a message, forged in fire. During the Ming Dynasty, justice often arrived on the back of pain, while whippings, flayings, and slow slicing were common across the empire. There existed another form of execution hidden behind the palace walls and dungeon doors, reserved for specific crimes: treason, betrayal, high-level corruption, or threatening the emperor's absolute authority. This collar was a device that could end a life without spilling a drop of blood. The collar itself was deceptively simple: a thick iron ring, shaped and hinged to close tightly around a human neck. At first glance, it resembled the iron restraints used for prisoner transport. But this collar was heavier, with reinforced edges that pressed into the throat and jawline like a vice. When it was time to execute the sentence, the collar was placed in a coal furnace until it glowed cherry red. Guards in thick gloves would extract the metal circle and bring it forward, the condemned stripped to the waist, their neck exposed and trembling, were knelt down and held in place by multiple enforcers. Then came the searing silence. The collar was fastened shut with brutal speed, clamping directly onto the flesh. The heat transferred instantly. It didn't just burn, it cooked. The neck skin sizzled as steam, and the stench of burning flesh filled the chamber. Nerves fried, muscles spasmed. Some victims lost consciousness in seconds. Others remained awake, choking, convulsing, eyes bulging in agony as their throats swelled shut. There was no screaming after the first few moments. The collar scorched the voice box, silencing cries as it welded itself to the body. It became a symbol of absolute power. The executioner didn't even need a sword. Fire did the killing. Executioners trained in this method knew exactly how long a victim could survive. If the iron was too hot, the person would die too quickly. If too cool, the punishment would fail. Perfection lay in balance. Reports from surviving clerical scrolls suggest the average victim took between 15 minutes to an hour to die. Death came from a combination of thermal shock, suffocation due to swelling airways, and eventual cardiac arrest. What made the red-hot collar so feared was not just the pain, but the ceremonial aspect. Unlike public beheadings or hangings, this execution was private. It took place deep in imperial compounds, out of view from peasants, but well within earshot of those next in line to rule. Bureaucrats, military generals, and even disobedient eunuchs were known to vanish into these chambers. Historical records tell of one infamous case: a senior tax minister who embezzled grain funds during a famine, rather than beheaded publicly, a fate that would give him the chance to speak final words. He was taken into the Forbidden City as torture cellars. There, before a small court of elite ministers and scribes, he was executed with the iron collar. Not a sound was heard outside, only the odor of cooked flesh lingering for days. The device was so efficient, it became a tool of political control. Rebels who turned coat, ministers who leaked information, even a concubine rumored to have poisoned a royal drink hall met the same end. Their names were sometimes erased from official records, their bodies buried without ceremony. Only the collar remained, cleaned and returned to the flames, ready for the next neck. Unlike execution methods designed for spectacle, the collar was personal, intimate. The victim looked into the eyes of those delivering their end. No fanfare, no crowd, just heat, metal, and silence. Chinese punishment systems were meticulous in record keeping, and though most references to the collar were later erased or buried, a few remained in private journals, secret bureaucratic transcripts, and the writings of foreign envoys who caught wind of this strange punishment. A Jesuit missionary visiting China in the late 1500s described hearing of a man who was destroyed by iron, not blade, and whose death left no wound to clean, only ruin within. Though the missionary never saw the collar himself, the rumor spread among embassies, whispered by terrified diplomats. In many ways, the collar represented the perfect storm of Chinese imperial justice: precise, controlled, spiritually obedient, No blood spilled to offend the earth, no decapitation to disrupt the celestial body, just fire, iron, and the slow extinguishing of rebellion. There is a reason few museums display the iron collar today. Most were melted down, buried with the dynasty, or hidden from modern eyes. But among historians of torture, its legend remains a reminder that cruelty, when wrapped in silence, becomes all the more terrifying. You've just heard the truth about the red-hot iron collar, one of the most excruciating punishments history ever forged. It wasn't myth. It wasn't whispered metaphor. It was real. And in torture's room, silence always screams, while the red-hot iron collar was never paraded through the streets. Its reputation still spread like wildfire through the imperial courts, whispered behind scrolls and murmured in the corners of candlelit halls. The collar came to embody the idea that rebellion wasn't just punished, it was incinerated. Ministers who once sat confidently in court found themselves double-checking every statement. Eunuchs who had grown too comfortable with the emperor's favors suddenly grew quiet, and military commanders, once defiant in victories, knew that the real defeat could arrive in the form of glowing iron. But there was another, more insidious element to this punishment: the preparation. Before the execution, victims were not immediately dragged to the collar. There was an eerie ritual to it, designed to break the mind before the body. Prisoners were often held in absolute darkness for days. Their meals stopped. Their chains remained cold, even as the anticipation of heat burned in their imaginations. Many victims reported hallucinations. Some reportedly begged for a public beheading instead. Others tried to confess imaginary crimes, hoping the court would show mercy. But mercy wasn't the point. The collar wasn't just a tool of death. It was a statement that the emperor's justice reached into every corner, seen or unseen. Historical texts, such as the Bureau of Punishment Scrolls and the Crimson Ledger of Imperial Enforcement, describe the collar with near reverence. One scribe wrote, "It is fire forged into law. To speak treason is to invite warmth upon the throat, the breath of rebellion silenced by its own heat." There are even recorded preparation ceremonies, rituals, where the executioner would recite oaths to the emperor, promising not only to deliver death but to uphold the moral purity of the court. Through fire, the metal collar, before being used, was polished, not to look clean, but to make the redness of its heat reflect in the eyes of the condemned. Some rumors claim the collar wasn't always placed on the neck. In the case of male traitors who had insulted the honor of the empress or defiled sacred texts, the collar was clamped around the abdomen or face. These stories are sparse, pulled from smuggled pages and foreign chroniclers, but they paint a picture of a punishment system without limits, one that tailored agony to the crime. In one such instance, a Confucian scholar named Li Shen was accused of altering imperial poetry in secret to include veiled critiques of the emperor's war campaigns, a crime not of violence, but of thought. He was taken during the night, held without trial, and reportedly executed via the collar placed around his lower jaw. When the collar was removed, his teeth were fused together, gums blackened, and the lower skull structure charred. The executioners noted that the victim remained alive for nearly 10 minutes. After application, shaking, unable to scream, his brain likely boiling behind sealed lips. The philosophical implications of this punishment ran deep in Chinese cosmology. The Ming and Qing courts held a deep belief in the harmony of the universe. The heavens, the earth, the emperor, all connected. Blood spilled unnecessarily could offend the spirits. The red-hot collar ensured justice without desecration of the sacred. It was brutal, but in the eyes of the ruling elite, it was balanced. Let's not forget the psychological terror for those still alive. It was known that during select trials, a condemned person would be placed in a cell adjacent to the furnace chamber. There, they would hear the hissing metal, the clanging of tools, and even the faint, muffled cries of those who came before them. It wasn't too rare for those awaiting execution to die of fear before their time came, their hearts giving out in the night, soaked in sweat and urine. Their bodies were quietly removed, and the collar waited, untouched. Over time, however, The red-hot iron collar began to vanish from records. The Ming Dynasty, while still brutal, moved toward more public, regulated forms of punishment. The collar was seen as too secretive, too medieval, and to intimate for an era moving toward modernization and diplomacy. But that doesn't mean it disappeared overnight. There are unconfirmed reports from the 1800s of its use in the White Lotus Rebellion, when loyalist forces captured enemy leaders. According to one European military advisor embedded in the king court, the collar was used in a hidden chamber during prisoner interrogations. The room was reportedly soundproofed with heavy stones, and the collar was so well heated that it glowed blue in the darkness. One officer wrote, "The man was already dead before the metal touched him. His eyes saw it coming and decided to leave the body before the flames could." Eventually, with the fall of dynastic rule and the rise of the republic, any surviving collars were melted down, some for scrap, others out of fear. Local legends claimed the metal retained a cursed heat. The blacksmiths who handled them later went blind, mad, or sterile. Yet today, a single collar remains stored secretly in a private collection, rumored to have been taken by a French diplomat in the 1700s. It is kept under lock and key, and no museum has dared display it, because to look upon it is to imagine that moment the hissing iron, the smell of death, and a neck trembling with finality. It is the reminder that in history, not all executions were loud. Some happened in silence, some you were cooked into memory.